A young child who was barely 2 weeks old is found unresponsive and was rushed to a local hospital where she never recovered. The investigation would lead to the young baby's mother being put behind bars, and now, months after her daughter's death, she faces more charges. The case first unfolded in June when hospital staff were treating a 16-day-old baby. But staffers were on high alert when they noticed the baby had suspicious injuries. According to police, the baby had multiple injuries, including bruising on her throat, eye, and head, as well as a broken arm and ribs. By June 23rd, the baby tragically died after being taken off life support. Investigators spoke with 33-year-old Brooke Kessler, the baby's mother, who gave more insight into what happened. Kessler allegedly told police she probably squeezed her daughter too hard while burping her. According to court documents, Kessler allegedly explained earlier in the day she was burping her daughter and placed one hand on the back of her daughter's head and around her neck because she was irritated with the baby and herself and probably squeezed too hard, causing those injuries. She reportedly claimed multiple times she wasn't trying to harm her daughter and even indicated her husband may have broken their baby's arm. But she also reportedly indicated to police her daughter's ribs may have been broken when she picked up her baby by the chest to burp her, and she was irritated and squeezed her daughter too hard, possibly breaking her ribs. Kessler's husband denied hurting his daughter, but seemingly told police what he believes may have been the cause. He reportedly told investigators his wife had been suffering from postpartum depression and would easily get frustrated. He told police she would often not change their daughter's diapers or even provide her with basic care. According to the complaint, Kessler's husband told police he had to stop her a few times from shaking their baby and would have to take the baby from her so she could cool down. Brooke Kessler was arrested in June in connection to her daughter's death. Initially, she was charged with one count of child abuse, causing serious bodily injuries. But since her charges have been upgraded when a Putnam County grand jury formally indicted Kessler on charges, including one count of death by a parent, guardian, or other person or person in position of trust in relation to a child by child abuse, one count of child abuse resulting in serious bodily injury, one count of child neglect resulting in death, one count of strangulation, one count of malicious assault, and one count of domestic battery. A really devastating case. So let's bring on psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober to get his insight on this case. Dr. Bober, thank you so much for joining me today. As we were speaking earlier, this case is truly horrific. A mother allegedly squeezing her not even or barely more than 2-week-old daughter to death. What's your reaction to this story?
Well, unfortunately, this is something that is quite common in the United States. Over 500,000 children are abused every year. 75% of those cases really fall under neglect, and about 20% are actually physically abused. There are several risk factors that can place someone at risk for abusing their child. For example, a history of trauma. We talk about the cycle of abuse, a history of mental health problems, a history of substance use, low self esteem, insecurity, a low frustration tolerance, and of course, attachment issues. In other words, mothers who cannot securely bond with their child. And of course, lack of support, being a single mom, having a young child, particularly a child less than a year, puts them at significant risk for abuse. So, although this is a tragic story, it's something we hear about every day.
And what do you make of the mother's explanation of all this, that she was just irritated with her own baby and squeezed her daughter possibly too hard while burping her?
I believe she was irritated, and I believe that she ended up using too much force. There may not have been malicious intent in her mind, but she probably was overwhelmed. She probably had, poor coping skills and just pushed it a little too far. And as we know, someone that age is extremely vulnerable, and it had a tragic outcome.
And then obviously her being just 16 days old, I just picture just a small infant being so small, so vulnerable. And the just reading the injuries were pretty horrific, brain swelling, skull fractures, broken ribs. In your opinion, does that suggest to you a level of hatred toward her own child?
You know, she may actually hate herself. She may actually feel that she wasn't equipped to handle the situation. And very often, when people feel that way, they project negative emotions onto their child. I would like to know about what was going on in this home. Was there a partner in the home? Was there family support? Was she socially isolated? Did she have a history of her own mental health problems? Was this child healthy? Did they require special needs? All these things come to mind that really set this up for a tragic outcome.
And from what we know so far, she did have help in the home. She was married. From my understanding, her husband's in the military, so must have possibly suggest that maybe he was gone from time to time. But when we cover a lot of these cases where a mother kills her child and claims it to be postpartum, do you think that applies in this story? And talk to me a little bit about postpartum.
When we think about postpartum, we think about Andrea Yates, the mom who drowned her five children. Probably about 2 to 3 in 10 women go through the so-called blues during their pregnancy. They can get down, feel depressed, and then about 1 to 2 and out of 100 get what we call postpartum depression, where their daily functioning is being affected. Unable to sleep. Maybe they're not engaging in self-care. A sort of lack of energy. They don't want to get out of bed, all these sorts of things that we associate with major depressive disorder. And then probably a few or 2 or 3 out of 1,000 experience what Andrea Yates experienced, and that's postpartum psychosis. And that is the most serious postpartum or peripartum psychiatric illness that obviously led to tragic circumstances in that particular case. But I do believe that it's possible that postpartum depression may have contributed to this. When you think about when you're depressed, you don't want to deal with the world. You don't have the energy, the motivation to keep going. Things sort of set you off. They lower your frustration tolerance. You're more irritable. You're less likely to engage in problem solving or coping skills. So that very well may have been a contributor, but obviously people have a visceral reaction to someone harming a child, especially a child this young. But I think a lot of single moms out there will tell you that sometimes they feel very overwhelmed, very unsupported, and they, maybe they have the thoughts of doing like something like this in their mind, but obviously going through with it and thinking about it are two different things.
Yeah, of course. And I think this case is startling, not just because of the crime, but also one quick look on social media. You see photos of Kessler with her pregnant belly, seemingly excited to become a mother. Then you see that this happens. What do you make of that stark contrast of what you see on social media, where a mother to be seems, by all accounts, excited for her young child to come into this world, but then afterwards, and again, not even too far after, it was just 16 days that something terrible and tragic happens like this.
I think social media causes us to always put our best foot forward, right? I call it the Facebook fallacy. We're always looking at these pictures of weddings and women with their baby bumps and they're going on ski trips and everything seems to be great, because unfortunately we live in a society where we're told that if we're showing that we're having problems or we're struggling, that it's seen as weakness or a character defect. So maybe things weren't as good as they were portraying on social media, but having a picture of yourself with a baby bump is very different than taking care of a child. And I think a lot of moms in this country don't get the credit that they deserve because it is enormously stressful to raise a young child. And there's so many societal expectations about what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to be. So I think for a lot of women, there's not only the hormonal changes that occur after pregnancy, but there's the expectations that occur from family and friends and everyone around you, that you should be, right on schedule all the time and have this sort of picturesque Norman Rockwell raising of your child. But we know that the reality is very different than that. And I think women don't get enough support and enough credit sometimes for that.
Yeah. And, just knowing that, she did have a partner at home, she was married, and that her husband had even reportedly asked his own mother for help with the child. Why do you think it was that while she was having such trouble adjusting to being a new parent, that she didn't just ask for help or more help or even just looking to someone like yourself for just an outlet of support?
Maybe she thought she can handle it herself. Maybe she thought that she would be perceived as weak and ineffectual. Maybe it was just ego. Maybe she just wanted to do it herself and felt that if she didn't, she was a failure. But in that moment when she did this, she obviously felt completely overwhelmed and was just full of rage. But again, we're talking about someone who is 16 days old. They're extremely vulnerable. And unfortunately, she didn't get the help she needed and she didn't get it fast enough.
And in your opinion, do you think by her bringing her daughter to the hospital, it showed some form of remorse?
I do. I do. I think she probably wishes she could have taken it back if she could. But again, sometimes we all do things in the moment that we regret. And I think this is one of those situations where In that moment, she lost control and she went too far.
Yeah, and just a horrible case just overall.
Tragic
Yeah,
outcome.
exactly. Dr. Bober, I want to thank you so much for your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, is there anything else you would like to add or any message that you have for mothers who are possibly struggling with these types of thoughts that haven't acted on them?
What I would say is if there are moms out there who are new moms and who are really struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help. Remember, asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It shows that you know yourself, that you know your limitations. There are community resources. Try to reach out for mental health support. Talk to extended family, talk to your friends, let people know you're struggling. Don't let something like this happen without the chance to get help and to get support first.
All right, Dr. Daniel Bober, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Brooke Kessler remains behind bars in the Western Regional Jail and is being held on no bond. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.